The shockwave was incredible as Sonic collided with his unfortunate target's chest, having executed his signature move, curling into a living cannonball and flinging himself at Mach speed. In this case, the target was SCP-343, inmate of the SCP Foundation and purported creator of the known universe. And the crazy thing was, Sonic was winning. God's sandals skidded back across the riven earth, steam rising off of his body from the sheer intensity of the battle. He heard the ear-rattling sound of approaching speed, knowing that the Blue Devil was roaring towards him. He heard the terrible voice ring out, "Is that fear I smell, Yahweh? Isn't that adorable?" Sonic arrived a fraction of a second later, eyes glowing red, bleeding down his cheeks. Pulsing red veins of light spiderwebbed across his body like kintsugi, radiating pure power. His white-gloved fist smashed into God's ribs, the force of it lifting his human-like form off the ground, blooming a shockwave of pure power out across the ground. God fired into the sky like a rocket, feeling the air warp around him like he'd never experienced before. And somehow, as he was carried up into the bloody sky, Sonic followed him, growling in a deep, guttural voice. "Are you ready to concede, false god?" Sonic cackled. "That I am the one true deity in this pathetic excuse for a universe?" God gritted his teeth. "Never." Sonic smiled, revealing a bandolier of sharp yellow fangs that led down into the infinite blackness of his hedgehog maw. "Oh, I was hoping you'd say that," he said. "There's still so much fun to be had torturing you." As Sonic laughed, following God's trajectory out of the stratosphere and into the hellish pixelated sky, he lifted up his hand and revealed something green glowing in his palm. As Obama had prophesied, it was a Chaos Emerald. How had all of this come to pass? You'd perhaps had trouble believing it, but things were normal only a few hours before, back when someone made the terrible mistake of letting God know about Creepypasta. Now we know what you're thinking. How can there be anything that God doesn't know? If 343's own accounts were to be believed, he was an omniscient being, all-seeing, all-knowing. And if quizzed upon this, he'd say yes, that's true, if he was still in his incorporeal form. However, much like his son Jesus, whom you may have heard of, he needs to occupy a human-esque form. Much like Jesus in his heyday, God is still capable of pulling off tremendous supernatural feats known to some as miracles. But it does impose limitations on some of his grander capabilities. This would become particularly dangerous in the coming conflict, starting with the inception point, when researcher Sherwood told God about Creepypasta. If you're watching this, you probably already know about this concept, given its adjacency to the horror space that features the creeps and creatures of the SCP Foundation. But the TLDR is that they're short internet horror stories often circulated with unclear authorship, often capitalizing on a sense of nostalgia or a corruption of innocence. Lost episodes of cartoons that contain sinister revelations, childhood toys with homicidal intent, and of course, freakish hacks of beloved childhood video games. Why researcher Sherwood decided to tell God about Creepypasta during the anomaly's mandatory socialization time is a mystery to all of us. Perhaps that was just his hyperfixation at the time, but it was the domino falling that led to God's discovery of Sonic.exe, a supposed account of a ROM hack of the original Sonic the Hedgehog video game, haunted by a demonic entity using Sonic as its avatar. At the end of the creepypasta, the entity escapes the game and declares itself God. To most, this seemed like just another hokey story, a cheap way to pander to the nostalgia of retro gamers. But to SCP-343, it seemed deeply disquieting. He sensed a dark energy coming off the story, something indicating some underlying maleficicum. This monster in the story, declaring itself God, as if to challenge the very Lord himself to defend his title. What if this creature somehow had the power to actually back up its claim? That was something God needed to look into. If this cursed game truly was real, and he sensed that it was, he needed to nip this thing in the bud, to find the monster and ensure that it never reached the level of power that it so clearly aspired to. And the first step was taking a day trip out of the SCP Foundation and finding the only surviving disk that contained the game. So began his descent into one of the most dangerous challenges this deity had ever faced. Drawing upon some portion of his celestial powers, he located the disc and transported himself to the building where it was being kept, a well-secured compound in the backwoods of America, hiding from the world with the help of a series of thaumaturgic environmental sigils. Whoever the people manning this building were, they were well-funded, well-staffed, and well-versed in the occultic arts. As soon as God manifested, he was quickly surrounded by ominous cloaked figures, their black robes marked with the blue letter X. None of them seemed afraid of SCP-343. What could possibly be the root of such astounding confidence? What would make them feel strong in the face of God? "He said you'd be coming," one of the robe men said. "He is never wrong." "And who might you be?" God asked. A peal of laughter rang out across the crowd. "We are the cult of X," one of the cultists said. "His humble servants." "We're here to test you," another said. "Yes," replied another, "to see if you are worthy." God sneered at this. "Worthy of what?" "To be destroyed by him, of course." Then the onslaught began. The surrounding cultists scrambled throughout the room, casting curses and binding enchantments, throwing balls of deadly, malefic energy. It was the kind of onslaught that almost no mortal thaumaturgist could survive. But of course, they weren't dealing with a mortal thaumaturgist here, were they? And when you come at God, well, you better come correct. With no effort at all, God dodged and deflected the attacks, enveloping himself in an almost blinding shield of heavenly light. He made the shield solid and pulsed it outwards, knocking all the cultists from their positions and forcing them to the ground. He then gave a single command: "Sleep." And every cultist in the building fell unconscious simultaneously. Given that he'd created every human being on Earth, God took no pleasure in killing one of his own creations, and would avoid it whenever possible. The thing that had commanded and corrupted these people, on the other hand, was none of his creations, and he would expend every facet of his godly might, all his nigh limitless power, at his disposal, to see this thing scrubbed away forever. In the compound's most secure room, not so much for God, of course, who could simply walk through the reinforced titanium as though he were a ghost, a single disc sat in a hermetically sealed plexiglass box, on top of a kind of holy altar. God thought it to be disgusting and profane, to have such reverence for an idol like this. And what power could anything capable of being sealed in an object like this really have when compared to him? God picked up the disc and snapped it in half. To give you the understatement of the millennia, he really shouldn't have done that. He really shouldn't have done that. The second the disc around him broke, the entire world around him changed, as though the world we lived in was just a dust cover over the true reality. The world of Sonic, but not the idyllic Green Hills zone that players might remember from their youth. A disgusting, evil aberration. Stone spires dripping lava and covered in occult symbols, wells of blood with bones floating inside, spikes and blades sticking out of the ground, like the aftermath of some terrible war where there had been no survivors. God looked around, almost impressed. "Neat trick," he said. "Where might I find the magician who played it?" Booming laughter rang out across the sky. It came from everywhere and nowhere. The voice of death and carnage, cruelty and lack. "The only one being played here is you, Yahweh," it said. Before God could even react, a blue flash hit him, slamming him off his feet. And before he could right himself, it swung back in, cutting a burnt trench into the ground wherever it rolled. It hit him again and again and again. How was this thing so fast? But God knew what to do. He created a localized bubble of slowed time and expanded it around himself just before the flash hit him again, locking the attacker in place. It was, of course, Sonic. This terrible, corrupted Sonic. The one arrogant enough to call itself God. He stared into its burning coal eyes and saw almost limitless cruelty within. "We're just getting started," it said, and kicked God in the face with both red sneakered feet. The propulsion of the kick knocked him out of the bubble of localized time manipulation, giving him his full range of motion again. God knew that he couldn't play defense against this thing. He couldn't afford to coast. He needed to attack this monster with everything he had. He floated off the air and flew towards the demonic Sonic. winding up a punch as Sonic flew backwards to avoid him. "So you're the one trying to take my name," God said, throwing a punch. Sonic dodged the punch and laughed. "How hubristic of you to even think it was truly your name. You have no power here in my realm, you know." He spread his arms wide and a number of orange objects floated towards God. Tails dolls, diabolical cursed puppets based on Sonic's best friend, Miles Tails Prower, that attacked God, latching onto him, siphoning off some of his holy energy. When charged, they began attacking, striking with their dangerous little fists. God grabbed each one, vaporizing them in his hands as they were sealed in his grip. Normally he'd be able to destroy them all at once, but this universe dampened his power. It was a localized pocket dimension with its own rules that he was yet to figure out, it seemed. But really the Tails dolls were little more than a malicious distraction. Sonic swooped in and cracked God with an energized fist, covered in spikes of malicious red energy. With every strike, God saw visions of atrocity and murder, of sadism and torture. That was the energy that powered Sonic. Every act of malice that had ever been committed in humanity's long and monstrous history. Sonic kicked him back and forth, sending him rocketing through the air. So this is how it feels, God thought, to be in a world that can march to someone else's drumbeat. And Sonic replied, as though reading God's thoughts. "Let's try a different tempo." He threw rings of burning yellow energy at God, binding spells meant to reduce the deity's capacity to fight back. Magic of the most demonic sort, inverted halos of hellish potential. The plan was simple. God could see it even if he wasn't able to stop it. Sonic was going to break him, bring him down, beat him to death. All to show the almost cosmic difference in their power within Sonic's own world. Perhaps here, he truly was God. More God than 343 had ever really been. Which brings us back to the beginning of our tale. Sonic.exe wielded a Chaos Emerald, a symbol of dark and incredible power within the Sonic universe. And in a world that operated by those rules, he could use it to harness force beyond even God's comprehension. He crushed the emerald in his hand and took it all into his body. With the Chaos Emerald, the monster was so much stronger than ever before. It was larger, with huge pulsing muscles cracking with green energy. He grabbed God around either side of his head and pulled him forward, slamming both knees into the deity's face, cracking the facade of his human skull. "Your reality belongs to me now!" Sonic roared, swinging another right hook into God's face. "It will be my twisted playground. There's nothing you can do to stop your precious human race from becoming little more than my toys, to change and break as I please." Another punch smashed God back down to Earth, creating a crater the size of Texas. Before he could even get back up to his feet, Sonic was down there with him, pounding him further into the earth. "I want you to know, it's all your fault," he said, voice booming with a twisted mix of rage and delight. "You let them all down. They're all going to suffer because of you." And if nothing else, God could not allow that. He couldn't let the world end, and he definitely couldn't let it end because of him. It would be worth destroying the entire reality with both of them in it to save the innocents from such a terrible fate. Would he be able to make the same sacrifice that he asked of Abraham, that he asked of his own son? He reached out, summoning all of his power into one hand, gathering up a universe's worth of Thanatos energy, and clenched his fist. When he opened his fist, it coursed out in a thick wave that enveloped the entire world. It destroyed him, destroyed Sonic.exe, destroyed the entire warped pixel universe that they resided in. And all that remained were two pieces of a broken disc in a vast building, surrounded by cultists deep in slumber, having no idea of all that had been lost, and all that had been saved. Now check out What If a Real God Battled SCP-343 God, Yaldabaoth Destroys the Imposter, or most godlike SCPs that you pray to never meet, for more.